Now, in the most recent census, the number of people identifying as Christian in this country fell below 50% for the first time. 46%, a 13% drop in the last decade. Churches are emptying, churches are closing, and it's in this same week the Archbishop of Canterbury, Justin Welby, bless him, has set up a £100 million fund to address past wrongdoings in the church to do with slavery. Is this really the right time? Isn't there a better use with £100 million, whether or not the church does have some murky association with the slave trade? Well, let's talk now to Dr. Rakib Ehsan, who's a social policy analyst. Dr. Rakib, what's your view on this?
My view, Andrew, is that it's just another indication of how wrapped up the Church of England are in this age of racial justice activism. We are a country where parishes and congregations are struggling, and senior clerics have admitted that £100 million for this slave-related fund to atone for the church's links with the transatlantic slave trade. It is a vast sum of money. And you describe the Church of England as sleepwalking towards irrelevance. Andrew, I'd use the term accelerating. You mentioned the census data. When I was 11 years of age, in the census of 2001, over 7 in 10 people in England and Wales identified as Christian. But as you say, in the most recent census, this was the first census where less than half the people, 46%, identified as Christian. And I think that's largely because the Church of England is increasingly becoming involved in social justice activity. And it's not sticking to the bread and butter of Christian concepts surrounding family, marriage and community.
I understand that the Church of England, the Church has an association with the slave trade. Much of current life does, including the monarchy and many of our companies. And apparently the association is to do with the South Sea Company, which was formed in 1711. The Church of England owes much of its current assets from that trade, which shipped 34,000 African slaves between Africa across the Atlantic. So I understand that's something that the Church wants to look at. But why does it take £100 million to address that issue?
Andrew, I think there's certainly a discussion to be had in terms of talking about the slave trade and Britain's involvement, and also Britain's involvement in ending the slave trade. I think that when you're looking at the Church of England, of course, they can be involved in those discussions and they can atone for its past links with the slave trade without committing itself to a £100 million fund for groups which have been identified as being affected by slavery. And I think there's a certain irony to this as well, Andrew, that one of my favourite authors, Tomiwa Owolade, he authored a piece where he basically talked about how it was West African migrants in South London which are renovating the churches, funding refurbishments. And I think that that's where the church should be focusing more in terms of its funding, in terms of reinvigorating those churches, as opposed to relying on Christian migrants to stump the bill.
Justin Welby, the Archbishop, banging on about more and more people using food banks. Well, wouldn't that £100 million that he's lavishing on this fund be better deployed in communities, as you describe?
Absolutely. I think that the Church of England certainly has a role to play in terms of highlighting very real forms of deprivation and how that feeds into traditional concerns surrounding family breakdown. Absolutely. So I think that there'll be many people looking at the size of the fund, £100 million, and thinking that the church, in terms of distributing those funds, that could be done in a more relevant and contemporary way, whether that's reinvigorating churches, repairs to church buildings, and also addressing very real forms of deprivation in our communities, which place a strain on social solidarity.